Dolly Parton built her life like a song, bright, catchy, unforgettable. But behind the rhinestones and the laughter, there was a story she never told. For 30 years, while the world adored her as the queen of country music, she was living two lives, one dazzling, one hidden. To her fans, she was fearless and funny. To those closest to her, she was guarded, quiet, and constantly on edge, terrified that the woman she truly was might never be accepted. Every wig, every sparkle, every joke was part of a careful performance designed to protect her from a world that expected perfection. And now, after decades of silence, the truth is finally out. Through her own words and her 2025 revelations, the woman behind the legend has stepped into the light. This isn't a story about scandal. It's a story about survival, loneliness, and the price of protecting your soul in a world that only wants the glitter. The Girl from the Mountains. Dolly Rebecca Parton came into the world on January 19, 1946, in a one-room cabin in Locust Ridge, Tennessee, one of 12 children born to Robert Lee and Avie Lee Parton. Her father was a sharecropper and construction worker who struggled to keep food on the table, and her mother, a homemaker with a soft, singing voice, filled their tiny cabin with hymns and faith. They were so poor that when Dolly was born, her father famously paid the doctor who delivered her with a sack of cornmeal. That story would later become one of the most repeated symbols of her humble beginnings, proof that even legends can come from dust. Life in the Smoky Mountains was hard but full of music. The Partons didn't have electricity, plumbing, or even running water. They washed in the nearby river, made their own soap, and sang to drown out the hunger and the cold. Dolly often said her family wasn't poor in spirit, just poor in money. Her mother's storytelling and her grandfather's gospel preaching gave her the gift of rhythm and melody long before she knew what fame meant. By the time she was 10, Dolly was singing on local radio stations in Knoxville. At 13, she stood under the bright lights of the Grand Ole Opry, introduced by Johnny Cash himself. That night, she decided she would never stop singing. But her dreams were bigger than the mountains that surrounded her. She once said, "I always knew I was meant for more than a cabin in the woods. I just didn't know how far I'd have to go to get there." The morning after she graduated high school in 1964, Dolly packed her few belongings and took a bus to Nashville. She didn't have a plan, just songs and courage. Nashville was a city full of dreamers, and most didn't make it. But Dolly's stubborn hope set her apart. She signed briefly with Monument Records, where executives tried to turn her into a pop singer, a move she hated. Her heart belonged to country music, the sound of home. Then came her break. In 1967, country star Porter Wagoner invited her to join his television show. Their chemistry was instant, and soon Dolly was a household name. But behind that smile and glittering voice, a new version of her was beginning to form, one the world would come to love, and one she would learn to hide. The creation of Dolly. By the early 1970s, Dolly Parton was no longer just a country girl with a guitar. She was a phenomenon in the making. On the Porter Wagoner show, her charm, voice, and quick wit made her a fan favorite. But behind the cheerful duets and matching outfits, Dolly was quietly building something that would outlast any partnership, her own identity. Porter Wagoner was a mentor and a gatekeeper, but he was also controlling. He wanted Dolly to stay in the background, to be the smiling blonde by his side. But Dolly had other plans. In 1974, she made the painful decision to leave his show and go solo. To say goodbye, she wrote "I Will Always Love You," a song that captured both gratitude and heartbreak. It became one of the most famous ballads ever written, later reimagined by Whitney Houston and earning Dolly tens of millions of dollars. Yet for her, it wasn't just a hit. It was a declaration of freedom. From that moment, Dolly began to shape her image with surgical precision. She piled her hair high, painted her lips bright, and wore sequins like armor. She once said her look was inspired by a woman in her hometown who was mocked as the town tramp. Dolly remembered thinking, if that's trashy, then trashy sure looks fun. What others saw as excess, she turned into empowerment. It costs a lot of money to look this cheap, she would later joke, and she meant every word. But the glitter had a purpose. It gave her control. When people were dazzled by the wigs, the laughter, and the outrageous quotes, they stopped looking deeper. It was her way of staying safe in an industry that chewed women up and spat them out. The wigs and rhinestones weren't just style, they were strategy. Still, fame came at a cost. The more Dolly built her persona, the less the world saw the woman beneath it. She became two people, the performer who could charm millions and the private soul who longed for quiet. Even when she was exhausted, she never let the mask slip. She admitted to sleeping in her makeup so that if a fire or earthquake struck, she'd still look ready for the cameras. It sounds like vanity, but it was survival, her way of staying untouchable in a world that expected perfection. By the end of the decade, Dolly Parton was no longer just a singer. She was an icon. But the higher she climbed, the more carefully she had to hide the cracks beneath the sparkle, the hidden marriage and the private woman behind the legend. In 1966, long before the Wigs and World tours, Dolly Parton married Carl Thomas Dean in a tiny ceremony in Ringgold, Georgia. There were no photographers, no celebrity guests, just Dolly, Carl, her mother, the preacher, and the preacher's wife. While Dolly was destined to live in the spotlight, Carl was the opposite. He hated fame. He once went with her to a business event early in their marriage, then told her afterward, "Don't ever ask me to go to another one of these damn things." And she never did. For nearly 60 years, Carl remained the ghost of Dolly's story, rarely photographed, never interviewed, and almost never seen in public. It became one of Hollywood's most enduring mysteries. Was he real? Were they still married? Was Dolly hiding something? Fans speculated endlessly, but she just laughed it off. "People think I've got a mannequin in the closet named Carl," she once joked. In truth, their marriage was real, but it was lived entirely on her terms. Carl ran an asphalt paving business in Nashville and preferred a quiet life. Dolly, meanwhile, became one of the most recognizable women on earth. The contrast was striking. She shined under stage lights. He stayed in the shadows. But that separation was exactly what kept them together. Dolly once said, "We're totally opposite, but that's what makes it work. I stay gone, and when I come home, we're glad to see each other." Carl's death in March 2025, at age 82, marked the end of a love story that had survived decades of scrutiny. In her tribute, Dolly called him "my anchor in the storm." She admitted that his quiet strength had been her foundation through fame, heartbreak, and exhaustion. Their marriage was the clearest example of her double life, the woman the world adored, and the woman who only Carl really knew. Behind closed doors, she cooked for him, watched old movies, and left the stage persona at the door. He didn't care about the wigs or the fame. He loved her as Dolly Parton, not Dolly the superstar. In a world where everything about her glittered, Carl Dean was her calm, proof that even the brightest lights need a shadow to survive. Faith, contradictions, and the secret struggles. Dolly Parton's life has always been full of contradictions, and she has never apologized for them. She is a devout Christian who once posed for Playboy, a woman of faith who built an empire on glamour and wit. She could quote the Bible and crack a joke about her bust in the same breath. "I'm not a saint," she once said. "I'm just a work in progress." But behind those contradictions was something deeper, a constant effort to balance her beliefs with her fame and her generosity with her own pain. Her childhood faith in the Smoky Mountains never left her. She prayed before every show and often said her songwriting came from divine inspiration. Songs like Light of a clear blue morning and He's Alive reflected that side of her. Yet she also lived in a world where purity and perfection were expected of women in country music, and she refused to conform. When she appeared on the cover of Playboy in 1978, wearing the famous bunny suit not nude, it scandalized conservative fans. But Dolly laughed it off. "I did it because I thought I looked kind of cute back then," she said. The world saw a publicity stunt. In truth, it was a declaration of independence, a reminder that she belonged to no one's definition but her own. That same spirit carried into her business life. She owned her publishing rights, a decision that would make her tens of millions after Whitney Houston's version of "I Will Always Love You" became one of the biggest hits in history. When Elvis Presley's manager demanded half the song's royalties in 1974, Dolly refused. She later said, "That decision bought me Graceland." It wasn't arrogance. It was self-respect in an industry that had taken advantage of countless women before her. Still, all that confidence came with a cost. During the 1980s, behind the laughter and success, Dolly fell into a deep depression. In her memoir, she confessed to battling exhaustion, self-doubt, and even suicidal thoughts. Fame had given her everything, yet it isolated her completely. The woman who brought light to millions was silently losing her own. But as always, her faith saved her. She later said that prayer and music pulled her back, reminding her that even in her darkest hours, her story wasn't over. The power of giving and the secrets revealed in 2025. While the world focused on Dolly Parton's wigs, voice, and sparkle, her truest legacy was being written quietly in the background. Long before charity became fashionable among celebrities, Dolly had already turned her success into a mission. She created the Dollywood Foundation and launched the Imagination Library in 1995, an idea inspired by her own childhood poverty. She wanted every child, no matter where they came from, to have books of their own. What started as a small project in her hometown grew into a global movement. By 2025, it had distributed more than 270 million books to children across 5 countries. But Dolly's giving didn't stop there. In 2016, when wildfires devastated parts of Tennessee, she donated over $12 million to victims who had lost everything. In 2020, she quietly gave $1 million to Vanderbilt University Medical Center to help fund research for the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine. The world later nicknamed it the Dolly drug. She laughed off the praise, saying, "I just wanted to do good." But her donation came at a critical moment, when early funding determined how fast the vaccine could be tested. By 2025, health experts agreed that Dolly's timing had saved lives. And yet, for all her generosity, Dolly rarely took credit. She avoided political awards and turned down the Presidential Medal of Freedom twice, once under Donald Trump and again under Joe Biden. Her reason was simple. She didn't want her kindness to be linked to politics. "I don't work for awards," she said. "I just try to do what's right." That humility became part of her myth, proof that beneath the glitter was a woman guided not by ego, but by heart. Then came 2025, a year that revealed just how carefully Dolly had lived in 2 worlds. In interviews promoting her book, Behind the Seams, My Life in Rhinestones, she admitted that the Dolly the world knew was a character she created. She called it her ventriloquist dummy, a persona she built to protect her real self from fame's demands. She spoke openly about sleeping in her makeup, wearing long sleeves to cover pastel tattoos that hid surgical scars, and never riding her own roller coasters at Dollywood for fear her wig might fly off. For the first time, fans began to understand that the rhinestones weren't vanity. They were armor, and beneath them was a woman who had spent 30 years protecting her peace. The final years, the double life revealed, and the legacy she leaves behind. By 2025, Dolly Parton was no longer just a country icon. She was a symbol of endurance, generosity, and mystery. At 79, she stood at the top of a mountain she had climbed for 6 decades. But she did so quietly, with humility and grace. The world finally began to see what her friends had known all along. Behind the humor, there was loneliness. Behind the wigs, there were scars. Behind the legend, there was a woman who had fought her whole life to stay human in a world that demanded perfection. When Carl Dean died in March 2025, Dolly's private world changed forever. Her closest friends said she went silent for weeks, retreating from public life to grieve the man who had anchored her double existence. She later said, "He was my home." And with that loss, the line between her two selves, the public star and the private woman, began to fade. That same year, she revealed she had already recorded her final song, Silver Line, a farewell she wanted released only after her death. "I want people to hear my heart, not just my voice," she said. The track, sealed in a vault alongside a video message to her fans, stands as her last act of control, a final chapter written on her own terms. Her later revelations also uncovered struggles she had hidden for years, a decade-long vocal cord disorder that threatened her voice, secret tattoos covering medical scars, and a quiet restoration of her childhood cabin in Locust Ridge, funded anonymously through what she called the Songbird Foundation. Even her faith deepened with time. Through her 2025 podcast, Heart Songs and Hallelujah, she spoke about prayer, resilience, and learning to let go of fear. Her spirituality wasn't about rules. It was about gratitude and the belief that she had been blessed so she could bless others. Looking back, the so-called double life was never a lie. It was a survival strategy, the only way Dolly could protect her heart while giving the world her best. The wigs, the sparkle, the endless humor, they were all part of a plan to stay in control of her story. And somehow it worked. The girl who grew up in a one-room cabin with no shoes became a global legend, not because she hid who she was, but because she refused to let the world take her soul. For 30 years, Dolly Parton lived behind a mask, not to deceive the world, but to protect herself from it. Her story reminds us that sometimes the brightest stars carry the heaviest secrets, and the loudest laughter hides the deepest pain. She turned poverty into power, fame into purpose, and heartbreak into art. What about you? Which part of Dolly's hidden life surprised you the most? Her private marriage, her secret tattoos, or her final song waiting to be heard? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell. Because in this channel, every legend has a story you've never heard.